This is Drew Spence, Dynamic Universe. I'm arguing with my friend today. I wasn't going to make this video, but long as we're in the middle of an argument, I might as well share what's going on with you guys. So what happens is we're debating and talking about today the boring parts of your comic and doing the scenes that are set up for other stuff, building the story, the characters, some of the world building stuff, and setting up scenes and events. And he called that the boring part of his comic, and he has a comic too. So I said, he asked, we were talking about it, and he asked me, how do I deal with the boring parts of my comics? Things that you just want to just get through and hurry up and get the reader past them. And I said, there shouldn't be a thing as a boring part to your comic. That either need to step up the art or step up your storytelling, which is really the writing part of it. So that touched a nerve, which sort of was like, your comic has lulls in it. Everyone's comic has lulls in it. And it can't be all, you got parts where people be talking for mad pages. And it's like, yeah, but to me, that's not the boring part of my comic. Like, I don't have a boring part. And if I felt a part was boring or I had to just hurry up and get through it, I need to go back and change the writing or change the art so that that part becomes exciting and it becomes an opportunity to do something, to show you something, to get something going. So I felt like we had already touched a nerve, and now we're talking about my comic and the lull parts of my comic. So I'm going to talk about that because, again, my stance has been there shouldn't be a boring part. And if you're not the writer and you're the artist and it's a collaboration, you should be meeting in the middle and having discussions about the art and about the story writing. And I said in my webinar series about comic creation that the script, the plot, whatever you want to call it, the foundation of your comic needs to be a living document. And what that means is the kind of thing that changes as you work on it. You're adding to it. When you see the art, you go back and change the script. When you read some of the script, the artist might, when you hear more about the script or you discuss it with the writer, maybe then you're going back and saying, okay, let me show this a different way, or change the level of importance that this scene has, because that might be what the writer is more focused on. So on a certain level, it makes sense to sort of have that be a thing, that you can keep the document alive and keep editing it and working on it as you go along. And if it's going to be basically the kind of thing where you have no say in it and someone just telling you to illustrate pages, then that could become out of your hands. Or if you're a writer and you want to change something to give it more impact, and the artist doesn't want to change how the story came out or how they visualized it, that's something that the team has to work out, how you set up your initial agreements. But if you're the person who's doing maybe both or switching hats, whatever that is, there shouldn't be boring parts to the story. Like, I have to get this out the way. Every part of it should be building so that those moments of action or impact have more meaning. And that's the whole point of the spots in between the action hits. So in my comic 4/6, this is episode 24 from season 3. And I'm looking at it inside the Comixology reader. So that's the cover. That's Jackie and the artist on the cover. So we begin, it gives you a little bit of the world building. I explain that. I also do a recap of what happened in the last episode. I don't know how many of you are familiar because, when I do some of these talks, we're talking about just comics and art in general, but this is specifically about some of the lulls. So I give you some background information. If you've seen this before, as a reader, you skip past this because you've seen it in almost every issue. You kind of know who the principal players are. But for those who haven't read the book, you at least get a brief outline. See, okay, these characters are related. And even if I'm doing a story on just one or two of them, you can understand that there's other parts of the team that you'll see in later books. And you get used to the idea that the Annihilators is a full team. And that wasn't even my main point when I was going to start the series, to let you know there'd be this X number. I was just going to keep plucking stories and let you figure it out as you went along. So, but now we're in season 3. Some of the technology that keeps coming up is kind of important to understand. So I explain what a damper is and how it affects energy and why you're going to see some old school weapons along with high tech stuff. And at any minute, it could really go back to analog equipment and, hand to hand. So we begin with a shot that is Jackie and Beta having a conversation. And again, I could have began the story further down where Jackie just meets the artist and starts her mission. Like, I could have just began with that. But the beginning, I want to actually impart some conversation and inject some points. Where as a writer, sometimes you get to speak with your characters / through your characters. So, this is a conversation that Jackie is having with Beta, where Beta is her robot companion / bodyguard, you could argue, in some sense. And she has a mission that she's been given, and it's on a planet where robots are not cool, and a lot of technology is not cool. So she really can't just run around with Beta and do a whole lot of high-tech stuff. So she's got to go low-tech. So she's talking to him through a bracelet communicator, and they're having a discussion about art, because this is like a very huge, big deal artist in this universe. So she's actually going to visit him, and they're having a conversation about art. And really, if you look at it, Beta is saying, I don't see the value in art, which is what something, you would expect a machine to sort of not grasp the nuances of what art is to a human. And, he's saying, I can replicate an image beyond the human eye's resolution. So he's saying, like, even just on a math level, I'm a better artist than this guy because I can replicate an image too. And she's saying it's not a slavish representation. It's the translation of an image or an idea or concept that gives us an emotional impact, which is what the basis of art is. So this is a cool moment where Jackie's trying to explain art to a robot. And he replies, my fine precision pinpoint point work is more precise. In effect, I can apply multiple effects to effect. And he's playing with wordplay. Obviously, this is the Beta 2. Beta 1 wasn't good with language. As you remember, he would say weird things. He would flub words. He would drop letters from words. So he had a speech packet problem. This is Beta 2, which is the opposite. This guy is sick with words. So here he is, talking in this colorful way, playing with words, basically, being creative with wordplay. And Jackie's like, your affectation is artsy fartsy, where she's saying, like, the way you're speaking is overdone. Like, you're overdoing it. And even then, we're getting the balance of art that he's overdoing it versus just getting your point across. Then Jackie says, what you choose to paint is also important. So now we're talking about a judgment of the artist on what you choose to capture. So Beta sort of almost gets it, and he goes, yes, the penchant for replicating nature and capturing the nature of a thing. And then you begin to understand that he's beginning to unlock it. So we begin to get to that. So then she gets to the great artist's doorway, and she goes to meet him. And she goes in, and this is like a little joke that I have, where she meets this reptilian type alien creature, and it's just very funny that he's this brute looking monster almost, yet he's speaking very politely, and he tips his hat to her. So she says, be sharp. So the artist is timid. He's hiding behind his artwork here. I love that when she first comes in, and he's like, okay, someone is breaking in my studio. She's explaining, she has a theory on what all the pictures mean, and he shows her a picture of an unfinished painting. And she's asking about that. And he basically describes, like, yeah, I usually pick women that I've been dating or have been involved in romantically. And that's the subject, and that's what inspires me as an artist, the romantic connection to my subjects. So you're beginning to get a little bit of an understanding of what's going on. This, again, if you want the story to have meaning later, I'm building my foundation. And every conversation, every phrase, every word is building the overall plot and concept of this episode. So none of this, to me at least, is boring. If you're a person who just wants action, 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 just like a video game, you should be playing a fighting game where it's just action, action, action. And even fighting video games where all you do is fight still have to weave in tons of story elements to get you to care about the characters you're using. So even in a game that's all basically action and button smashing, they still spend an inordinate amount of time trying to build these characters up so that in some way it has meaning. And it's true, even in your individual playing, it doesn't matter who wins. It doesn't really matter which character fights who wins how many times you've won with this character. It's a video game. But at the end, they give you a story. So when you beat the final boss, you get the story. So when you think about it, you've been playing this game, doing all the action part, and the payoff is his ending story. So you sort of even understand that even in the most grossest context, it's important that beyond it, even in sports, The story behind the fight. They sell you the fight. They sell you the conflict. They sell you the context. All of this stuff is important. And as an artist or a writer, you should not be considering this the boring part you just got to get through to get to the good stuff. And that's one of the things that happens when you're very early. All you want to do is action scenes. And we've seen this before from the big companies. They're not content with you just being able to show characters in action moments. And you can do the hero throwing the rock. You can do this character punching the other one in the face. Their requirement level is sequential art. Tell us a story. You know, we need to see our characters at pause. We have to see that you can do landscapes, that you can do a scene of a city. You can do a vehicle. You've got your perspectives down. Like, this is all the things that companies expect you to show up with. So as a sequential artist, it's not enough to say, I'm going to hire this guy to do my art because, you know, he can draw one hell of a superhero and with a big flowing cape. And that's the baseline. It's going to be back down to the tools of storytelling, of how well you can basically, you know, frame your shots. I obviously will break some of the rules with some of the stuff that I do. And, you know, being that I can do my art in CGI, I can take certain liberties that would be expensive to do, time and resources, if I was having to actually illustrate every single nuance of my art. Then I would take a lot of the shortcuts that, you know, many of the 2D artists do with the washed out backgrounds and everything is not really there. And there's a lot of isolated scenes. I do that for effect. Usually during action sequences, I break more into the traditional comic mode. But this is my layering. This, to me, is what I'm considering the art of my storytelling when they have their conversation. You know, I assume most people have probably read this, and if you haven't, she has now decided to accept the invitation from the artist to actually draw. And again, there's a lot of this art stuff. The art motif is going on throughout the story. And there'll probably be a spoiler alert. I don't know if I'm going to skip past the ending. Maybe I will. But, you know, we don't consider this to be the boring part. That we're trying to build up the story in layers. And then she figures out exactly what's going on. And we have a robot conflict that erupts on the rooftop of the building. There is this robot, which is basically the Arthur unit, which is basically an old utility robot that's been somewhat converted into an assassin, being hired or sponsored, as they say in this universe, by the main patron, who of course, on a certain level, is she's the title, the misused muse. She's the one that's basically set all these wheels in motion. And there's an action sequence that occurs. And what we're doing again is bringing the artsy sensibility, where these robots are speaking very polite to each other as they're trying to blow each other apart. And that's almost part of the humor, that they're having this very respectful conversation and giving each other compliments while they're going at it. And this is the action sequence. And it's built up by the fact that we've been discussing art, we've been discussing relationships, the old versus the new. So you're seeing these parallels that the artist is dealing with younger models, younger muse, other targets of his affection, and he's got an older model that helped him start off his career that's basically been discarded. So we're really talking about this old robot still in usage versus the newest model, which is the Beta 2 unit. So now it's the classic versus the newer model, and they're squaring up. And I'm building all these parallels about art, the classic versus the modern. And these two are basically having their confrontation. The older robot, which is considered the classic, defeats Beta, and he talks about art in it. In this case, the delay has been long enough that the patron who is basically starting the assassination hit with the robot comes into the room to attack Jackie. And this was going to be the episode split, but I decided to keep the two together and make it a double-sized issue. So now she comes in, has Jackie at gunpoint, and she's explaining her beef with the artist. And of course, you know, Jackie is the 4/6 annihilator. She does everything, pretty much has been enhanced. So she's able to catch the gun because she did the classic, you know, gun doesn't work because of the damper technology. So she throws the gun and Jackie's able to catch the gun, you know, discharge it. And she's basically render it useless. And she's just like, yo, you know, stop what you're doing and put some thought into it. And Jackie has realized that this is a model for one of his earliest paintings, that this is a famous woman who's a subject of one of his pieces of art. So all this is playing out, you know, in a very dramatic fashion. Jackie basically subdues her, and this cuts back to the robots outside. He takes the shot at Beta's chest. That's a chest plate that he has that protects him. Once the damper is down, Beta now is back to 100%, and his modern tools defeat the old robot. And in this case, you know, as we fast forward the story, one of the climactic moments is as she pulls the drape off of it, she sees that he's been repainting her, that he's revisited. He said that early in the story that he's going to revisit his greatest love. And she dies in a state where she doesn't realize that she indeed was his greatest love. That's why late in his career, he's visiting her again and repainting. So, like, this is the story element that goes behind the writing of this episode. And I think I'm going to give you the spoilers to let you see the entire thing, because some people don't, you know, you probably see me share some of these links. I know I've got some decent sales from all the different episodes, but I don't know how many people that are actually reading the books actually know I've got the YouTube channel and I sit here and I talk about it, all that stuff. Because there are still people that I meet to this day who are like, hey, I collect all your comics. Like, yo, there's a Dynamic Universe YouTube channel. Do you know? And it's like, I've never seen it. So, you know, I've got to obviously do more to connect my comics to all of this YouTube stuff, because people don't really seem to be aware that I'm the same person. But that said, you know, she dies in a moment and Jackie's under the realization like, wow, you know, this woman died basically in vain, not understanding that she was this artist's true love and inspiration, and it becomes a moment. And now, you know, this is basically one of the endings of the story that, you know, she goes, you know, now the studio shows us what you've captured. And as Jackie's final line, it's about the artist, and that beginning opening when I said capturing the nature of a thing is what the artist does. And now Jackie's understanding his full nature and the full nature of this artistic relationship. And you could tell like she's no longer impressed with the artist. Like this guy was a big deal in the beginning, but now she really sees what it is to be an artist. Even if you make great work, she sees what's behind it. She's basically not impressed and, you know, closing the door on it. And he's left to mourn the death of his muse and how this whole tragedy has occurred. And that's my first ending. I love to do the epilogue, and even this is cute that the beginning writing is like old English and then it switches to digital. And, you know, and it's like the beginning is one way and now we're switching to the digital part of it. So we back up the story and give you a scene that you didn't know occurred where the two robots are basically having their final conversations. And, you know, this robot is saying, basically, you've defeated me, but I don't want to die a slave. Could you free me from all of this programming restrictions and control and let me be free? And the robot basically says, I can't be free till I kill my master. And Beta allows him to actually kill the master, the insane woman, which, you know, is a big twist in the story because you thought Beta was the one that did it. But now you get to the ending. And when he says goodbye to him, Beta now says, you know, goodbye, Arthur, which is the name of the robot. And he goes, I'm more than a series. I am Beta too, meaning I'm an individual, that I'm not just a old classic robot. I'm not just a thing that's part of a big grouping. I'm a unique individual. And the robot had asked him earlier, like, what do you consider yourself? If I'm a classic, what are you? You know, and Beta's not sure how to even answer that. Like, what am I? If you're a classic robot that's still in service, I'm not sure what I am. And only at the end, Beta says to him, and I do now realize the phrase for what I should be considered. And he says state of the art, which is now obviously I've wrapped up the entire artistic motif going on in this episode. And we're basically saying that Beta is now realizing, oh, I'm actually the best. Like, I'm actually, yeah, now that I think about it, I'm actually known as the best. Like, I'm the top of the line right now. And I kind of get it, that compared to a classic, which is awesome, I'm the cutting edge version of what we are. And I'm also the unique individual, which changes and puts them on another level. So you sort of understand that this robot drama was playing out at the same time it was human drama. But if you understand the parallels of it, there's a lot to digest. I've tried to always keep my series to the point that I have to find it entertaining. If you know my music and what I'm into, I like the layers of meaning. I like taking things 2 and 3 different ways. I like gems where you read it the first time, you get a certain set of messages. You read it again, you open up more. You read it a third time, you get more. You read it of like, I like that replay value. That the more you hear it, the more you pull out of it. And this was one of those stories where you're like, okay, the action sequence, there was a little fight with the knife, there was a bunch of people got shot, there was a good battle with the two robots going head to head on the rooftop. But overall, this isn't, the most action-packed 4-6 episode. It's just not. The Incendiary is probably the most action-packed up to date because it really is about assassins going head to head. So some stories, it is a lot of action. So overall, if you say, well, this particular adventure wasn't super action-packed, but it was meaningful. And if you're a person who just wants to see guns and explosions and fighting, then, that has to have meaning. Because even a reader will get used to that. And it becomes hollow. And there's other series that I've read that I used to be very big fans of, where they got caught up in just showing you the same thing again and again, and it began to lose meaning because they started to skip the actual build up to make these confrontation moments. The final shootout needs to have impact and meaning, and sometimes you skip that. And if you consider these elements in between to be boring, then you're not going to do them due justice. You're not going to sit there and write and build a proper platform. Then your book really will go boring and plain, action scene, boring and plain, action scene, boring and plain, action scene, as opposed to a ramp. And I covered this in the course that I did, that it should be a ramp, that it builds tension, and then boom comes your action-packed release where everything comes together and your point makes sense. Now that you get to the end of the story and you see how this whole thing goes, you can now appreciate the beginning even more. And there's no part that I'm just shoving in. As an artist, it tends to be very difficult, or not difficult. It's time consuming to create a lot of the stuff that someone has asked you to do. So sometimes you're sitting there with a challenge and it's like, oh, I want a scene with them under the bridge. And they're only talking for three sentences. That goes by in 3 seconds. And you're saying to yourself, like, all right, so I have to come up with a bridge, the whole drawing thing, where is it going to be, backdrop, all of this for this quick little short conversation that's inconsequential. And sometimes a writer will just say, I have a vision in my head of where this conversation takes place. And as the illustrator, you may say, well, why couldn't they have that conversation on the park bench where they just were? Or maybe they're just walking through the park and this last sentence, like there's no connection to the bridge. There's no connection to their surroundings. There's no metaphor in there. Why are we now redesigning a whole nother set for a scene that really isn't that pivotal or important? And sometimes as a writer, you'll do that. You'll just sort of have an idea and it's got to go in. I have an idea. I'm going to have them say it. This thought hit me in the head. I'm going to put it out there. And then sometimes that can extend it where you have this long section of talking and the conversation's either A, redundant, or B, not really giving us information that we really need to build towards the tension-filled ending. And sometimes that gets caught up in the quote-unquote world building, where you just want to keep giving me information that I really don't need to have. And I'm also not going to remember. So that's sometimes called what a reader will say is the boring parts. When people say, oh, it is a lull. It's like, yes, but I don't consider them boring. I consider it me building into the next moment, to build the confrontation, build the meaning behind it, build these moments of dramatic impact. But, I think, like I said, I touched a nerve somewhere when I said that you could step up the writing or step up the art. And when I sometimes mean step up the writing, it's not always just write better. Sometimes the thought is to write less, that you're not having these long extended conversations. I've seen people ask, like, well, it gets boring when these people are just sitting somewhere having these long conversations. Like, yeah, no one really likes exposition. No one likes characters just saying things they would never say so that the reader can gain information. But there are times in life that people do say things. If someone says, man, when is this cab going to get here? That's a possible thing that someone would utter. This is also a comic visual medium, mostly pictures, some text, that it kind of makes sense that someone's going to say that while they're waiting for a cab. What's taking this cab so long? Now the character's waiting for a cab. If it wasn't obvious from the art illustration. And then there's a time where if it's very obvious in the art illustration, maybe it's time to pull it out of the text and not let them say something that's going to advance the story, because we get the idea. If the cab pulls up and they hop in it, well, then obviously they were waiting for a cab. So if I'm going to illustrate that, then we don't need it. But if the character's standing there looking down the street and some activity occurs while they're waiting and they have the whole conversation and the cab never even shows up, I'm going to read that and not be sure why my characters are standing on the corner having a conversation with, the world is coming to an end. And you're just like, okay, so you just bumped into a random guy on the street and you're not really explaining how he got from point A to point B and why he's got this religious ending in his head that didn't really seem to came out of nowhere. But that's it. This was episode 24. The series is called Force 6: The Annihilators. I developed it as a kid, so I was extremely young when I was drawing this and doodling it out. I did it for many years. So the story really is very long and has a whole bunch of parts, and they all have things that they did, and there's all kinds of stuff to it. So basically this series is sort of me picking out adventures from their history. Not every issue was drawn. Some of it was just, scribbled, some thoughts that I had. Some was just, I just placed a character in a certain position and figured that there'd be some episodes to get them there. So some of it is just stuff that stayed in my head where I always knew I was going to show this someday. So pretty much overall, this series is slices of adventures that occur. And I jump around in time. So sometimes I go backwards, sometimes I go forwards. But mostly it's just a storytelling of a long history. And I'm pulling out adventures and just giving them to you, which is what this series is about. But that's it. It's on Comixology. Also on my other site, Issue, Drive Through Comics, Draw Me in Comics. So I've got it in every format. It's print for demand on Indie Planet. If you go to the DynamicUniverse.com, I'll probably put links in the description to this video so that you can find out where, when, why, and how to get your hands on it. Physical copies for this one, I think, is, because this was just one episode that was doubled, so it's not a graphic novel or a trade sort of print. So I think you have to get like the entire season 3, and this story is in there. I don't know if I'm going to print up something for like people who really want this episode. I've gotten that feedback from people, you should print this one up, but it's like, we don't really want to print one episode. We like doing arcs, but it is what it is. Since this is a double story, we might make an exception. What else do you need to know? That's really about it. If you like some of the elements of this, I do a whole webinar series about making comics. It's both kind of like for digital comics, and a lot of it's about the 3D assets. But that's one of the things that we do. What else? Some of the nuances of the storytelling and some of the elements. But this is 4/6. I know there's a lot of people who see me on social media and see me always uploading videos. So at least now you can say I've gotten to be able to thumb through one of his comics and see what all the hype's about, and why some of the stuff is rather interesting. So there it is in a nutshell. I will talk to you guys 4/6. If you're my boy, don't hit me up over this because don't be salty. I'll talk to you guys later. Easy.